EU severely restrict the issuance of multiple entry visa to Russian applicants. That being said, certain limited exceptions remain.
Vladimir Putin used many tools at his disposal to destabilize Europe. Energy blackmail, sabotage, and most recently, drone harassment. However, these moves triggered a crippling countermove that the Kremlin did not expect, and the doors to Europe closed indefinitely to millions of Russian citizens. On November 7th, the European Commission suspended multiple entry visas allowing Russians free access to the Schengen area indefinitely. Why? This decision is a direct consequence of the hybrid war the Kremlin has been waging on European soil for months. Putin tried to bring the war to Europe with drone harassment, sabotage networks, and airspace violations. But Europe brought the war back home to the Russian elite and middle class in the form of a bureaucratic blockade. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas's words sum up the spirit of this new era. Travel to the EU is a privilege, not a guarantee. Starting a war and expecting to move freely in Europe cannot be justified. What does this mean in practical terms for people living in Moscow, St. Petersburg, or Kaliningrad? At first glance, this may seem like a problem for the wealthy, but it is not. For millions of ordinary Russian families with relatives in Europe, especially in the Baltic states and Germany, this decision means family separation. It means not being able to see their child in Latvia or their grandchild in Estonia. More importantly, this decision acts as an iron curtain closing off escape routes from Russia. Europe was a refuge for the educated middle class who wanted to escape Putin's latest waves of mobilization and build a freer life. That refuge is now gone. These new single-entry visa applications will now be subject to enhanced verification and heightened security screening. In diplomatic language, this means a de facto ban for ordinary Russian citizens. Enhanced security screening means that every applicant will be scrutinized as a potential Europol report subject, a sabotage risk, or an intelligence asset. This means applications will take months, not weeks. Rejection rates will exceed 90%, and the application process itself will become an interrogation and humiliation ritual. The EU is not only locking the door, it is also turning the doorstep into a bureaucratic minefield. When this bureaucratic wall is combined with the already existing physical wall, the logistical stranglehold is complete. The Brest and Kozlovice border crossings, which Poland has kept closed since September 12th, had already cut off Russia's main land route to Europe. The borders of Finland and the Baltic countries are similarly under tight control. The result? Air travel is now hampered by nearly impossible visa procedures, while land travel is hampered by physical barriers. Putin has locked his own people in an open-air prison. The decision also has repercussions for the elite. This is where the real blow comes in. Putin had an implicit social contract with the Russian elite. You don't interfere in politics, and I won't interfere with your luxurious lifestyle in the West, your yachts, your villas, and your children's education in London. As of November 7th, 2025, the hybrid war Putin started has destroyed this very contract. For these elites, the multiple-entry Schengen visa was more than just a piece of paper. That visa was part of their identity. They were global Russians. They earned in Moscow and spent in Nice. Putin took away their privilege. They can no longer physically access their villas in Italy, their bank accounts in Spain, or their private schools in Switzerland. This will create unprecedented anger and panic in the Kremlin corridors. Because these elites can lose everything, but they will never forgive losing their status. The economic impact of this decision, while not as direct as an embargo, is much deeper. First, the reverse brain drain. Tens of thousands of talented Russian IT specialists, engineers, and scientists fleeing the war had sought refuge in places like Georgia, Armenia, and Serbia. They plan to move on to Europe from there. Now that door is closed. These talented people are now forced to either return to Russia against their will or remain in a perpetual limbo. Second, commercial collapse. Consider Russian companies still trying to do business with Europe despite the sanctions, trying to import machinery and transfer technology. You are about to sign a critical agreement with a German company, but you cannot fly to Berlin. You can't attend a trade fair. You can't send your engineers for technology transfer. This is a move that cuts off the last remaining capillaries of the Russian economy. Moreover, This decision shows that another clause of Putin's tacit social contract with the Russian people has been torn up. That contract was, "Give me political obedience and I will provide you with stability and, relative to the West, prosperity." An important part of that prosperity was the privilege of traveling freely in Europe, owning property there, and enjoying the Western lifestyle. As Kaja Kallas said, that privilege is now over. The place most affected by this situation is Kaliningrad, which is effectively a geographical trap. With the land borders of Poland and Lithuania effectively closed, civilian travel to Europe has become a logistical nightmare for Russian citizens living in Kaliningrad. These people are now forced to either pay astronomical prices for plane tickets or take long and circuitous sea routes to reach Europe. So why did Europe press this button that panicked millions of Russian citizens? First and foremost, the most concrete evidence of the escalation emerged in Scandinavia. In September 2025, coordinated and persistent drone harassment occurred around critical military bases hosting NATO's most advanced fighter jets, the F-35s, at Copenhagen and Oslo airports. This was not the work of civilian hobbyists. Danish intelligence, through technical analysis, found strong evidence that these drones were launched from Russian Shadow Fleet ships operating in the Baltic Sea. This was more than harassment. It was a direct military reconnaissance and capability demonstration. Russia was flying UAVs over NATO's most sensitive military assets, endangering civilian air traffic. Russia also increased its pressure on the Baltic countries at the military level. On September 19, 2025, in an incident confirmed by NATO's Baltic Air Policing Mission, 3 Russian MiG-31 fighter jets provocatively violated Estonian airspace for 12 minutes, disregarding international law. This was not a navigation error. It was a deliberate action designed to test NATO's response time and push the boundaries. However, the threat was not only coming from the air. Perhaps the most alarming development was the critical report published by Europol in March 2025. Europol was explicitly warning EU capitals. The report documented that Russian intelligence services were actively using organized crime networks and local criminals to carry out physical sabotage actions on European Union territory. This was a new phase of the war. It was no longer just about disinformation or cyber attacks. It was about the threat of sabotaging, blowing up, or derailing the logistics lines sending aid to Ukraine. The visa decision on November 7th was built on these 3 pillars. A Russia that violates NATO airspace with military jets, harasses F-35 bases with drones launched from shadow ships, and plans sabotage with organized crime gangs inside. For the EU Commission, this meant that the security risk had reached an unacceptable level and that privileges had to end. This bureaucratic move, as announced, is actually the final move in a geopolitical chess game that has been going on for months. Europe's decision to lock the Schengen gate is the final brick in a defense wall built step by step against Russia's hybrid threats. To understand how this blockade was constructed, we need to examine the critical steps taken throughout 2025. That time tunnel. It all began with the exposure of hidden threats before the visible military activity. In March 2025, Europol sent that shocking report to EU capitals. The report revealed that Russia was using or preparing to use local organized crime networks for acts of sabotage and arson on EU soil. This was the first alarm bell. It showed that the threat was no longer confined to the Ukrainian border. It added the free movement of Russian citizens to the security bureaucracy's agenda as a risk factor. The second step was not bureaucratic, but physical and concrete. Citing the Zapad 2025 military exercise conducted jointly by Russia and Belarus, Poland closed its main border crossings with Belarus, Brest and Kozlovice, indefinitely on September 12th. These were not ordinary crossings. This decision physically cut off Russia, especially Kaliningrad, from Europe by land. Logistical strangulation had begun. If the threat in March was covert, the threat in September was overt and audacious. Russia responded to Poland's physical wall with military harassment. Drone harassment of F-35 bases in Denmark and Norway, and the 12-minute violation of Estonian airspace by MiG-31s on September 19th, showed that hybrid warfare had taken on a military dimension. These actions transformed security concerns in Brussels into a security crisis. The final step in the blockade was taken when the back door Russia used to bypass these physical and military barriers was exposed. The Kremlin's plan was simple, but equally dangerous. Although Serbia is not an EU member, its citizens could travel visa-free to the Schengen area. Shortly after the war began, in 2022, Serbia and Russia signed agreements deepening their cooperation in intelligence and security. These agreements paved the way for Russian elites and intelligence officers to be granted Serbian citizenship, as revealed by platforms such as Medusa and NV.ua. According to the disclosed data, those who obtained Serbian passports were not just ordinary citizens fleeing the war. The list included names linked to the Kremlin's darkest operations. Operational officers directly affiliated with the Russian Internal Intelligence Service, allies of Nikolai Patrushev, a member of Putin's Security Council, and perhaps most importantly, critical industrial figures subject to Western sanctions, such as Russia's nuclear weapons producers. For these individuals, a Serbian passport was a golden ticket to circumvent sanctions, move freely in Europe, launder money, transfer technology, and coordinate sabotage operations, as warned by Europol. Serbia was designed as a backdoor for Russia to infiltrate the heart of Europe. The November 7th decision directly targeted this doctrine. By suspending multiple entry visas for Russian citizens, the EU aimed squarely at the heart of this legal infiltration operation. Now, possessing a Serbian passport will not automatically grant free passage if it is known that the person also holds a Russian passport. The enhanced security screening rule was designed precisely to catch such dual passport holders who pose a high risk. With this move, the EU also sent a clear message to Serbia. If you continue to be Russia's Trojan horse, the visa-free Europe privilege for your citizens may also come to an end. This is a cleverly constructed, multi-layered diplomatic trap that also forces Serbia into a difficult choice. The back door is now locked. The EU's visa decision on November 7th is not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a broader counterintelligence operation against Putin's espionage and sabotage networks in Europe. While Serbia was the legal and elite infiltration method, the physical and brute force networks on EU territory have also been dismantled one by one since 2023. Europol's March 2025 warning was not a prophecy, but rather a confirmation of what was already happening on the ground. The collapse of these networks was particularly dramatic in two countries, Poland and the United Kingdom. Due to its geographical location, Poland became the main target of Russia's hybrid warfare, and, at the same time, the biggest failure of Russian intelligence. In December 2023, a network of 14 Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian agents was convicted of planning to blow up aid trains bound for Ukraine, derail military shipments, and even carry out sabotage operations. The network's modus operandi matched Europol's report exactly. Assignments were received via Telegram, and payments were made in cryptocurrency. March 2024. Polish and Czech intelligence dismantled another network that infiltrated the European Parliament in Brussels to spread pro-Russian propaganda and conduct disinformation activities. May 2024. A 9-person cell held for direct physical sabotage actions such as assault, arson, and attempted arson was also caught. The operations grew. In July 2025, 32 people from 5 different countries collaborating with Russian services for sabotage were detained in Poland. These systematic arrests in Poland prove how Russia's organized crime and hired saboteur tactics have been deciphered. If Poland was the center of brute force, London was the target of the Kremlin's elite operations in Western capitals, and heavy blows were dealt here as well. In May 2025, a network of 6 Bulgarian agents, found to be operating a sophisticated spy factory in London, were sentenced to a total of more than 50 years in prison. This cell was gathering intelligence and conducting operations on behalf of Russia across Europe. November 7th, 2025. Perhaps the most tragicomic evidence came on the very day the visa decision was made. A 66-year-old British citizen named Howard Phillips was sentenced to 7 years in prison for attempting to sell the personal information of then Defense Secretary Grant Shapps to undercover police officers he believed to be Russian agents, driven by James Bond fantasies and the desire to make money. This incident shows how Russian intelligence targets not only professional agents, but also Western citizens who attempt treason for money. These arrests prove that Russian intelligence engages in both brute force sabotage and elite infiltration attempts across Europe. But as Europol's report states, Western security services systematically hunt down these networks. The November 7th visa decision is the latest and most comprehensive step in this hunt. The price of war is now being paid not only on the Ukrainian front lines, but also at visa application centers in Moscow, at Poland's locked border gates, and in the panic of Russian elites unable to access their properties in Europe. So, what are your thoughts on this matter? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing us.